We had no specific courses that were dedicated to teaching English language learners. There was coursework available, but it wasn't part of our degree. So some of our classes, like our literacy block, dealt with differentiating for English language learners, and we would address it in maybe one class and discuss how they could be addressed or talk about it with different methods that we learned, but there was no specific coursework in terms of specific methods for dealing with English language learners. Kindergarten English language learner classroom. And while I had interacted with English language learner students through other practicums, I'd never been in an entirely sheltered ELL classroom before. Obviously, we talk a lot about differentiating instruction, and we talked a lot about it in my undergraduate courses that were preparing me to teach. But I think that being in an ELL class allowed or forced me to really try and understand the individual needs of students. And there's no way to make progress in teaching with ELL students unless you really sit down and understand where each kid is individually in each subject and in their language development. And in my class I had 4 ELL students. 3 of the students were Hispanic, and then one was actually French. And her dad was on sabbatical at a university, but it was her first experience really being immersed in English and speaking English with native English speakers. I think it would have been really helpful to have a totally separate class dealing specifically with language development in English language learners and different methods to use in that respect. I think that a lot of times my math methods courses and science methods course taught me a lot of ways to differentiate instruction for kids of all different levels. And that a lot of times even English speaking students had the same struggles that my ELL kids did. But in terms of language, I think it's really important to have specific methods in your repertoire that you're ready to use when you have those students in your class. That there's almost no chance that you're not going to have an ELL student in your class now, and that you should be prepared to really understand where they're coming from and how to help them where they are. And that a lot of times your classes prepare you to create a classroom and classroom rules and have procedures and all of those things, but to really understand why a kid doesn't know how to follow those rules, or why they don't like to share in class, or why they're really, really struggling with math, or why they give up when they get to something challenging, isn't necessarily something that class rules and procedures and math methods can allow you to be successful at. That a lot of times you need to sit down and understand who a child is and why that behavior is happening. And I think a lot of times to make a huge amount of progress in a year for a child who is really struggling, it's important to really take the time to get to know them as a whole child and not necessarily as just a child in a classroom.